Welcome to today's CMC Connect. I am your alumni moderator, and while we're just waiting for maybe a couple more people to join, you can go ahead and type where you're zooming from. And just a little bit about myself. So I was class of 2024. I graduated December 2023 with a double major in CS and math from Harvey Mudd and economics from Claremont McKenna College. So during my time at CMC, I worked as a research assistant for Professor Keil, our speaker today, at the Lowe Institute of Political Economy. And I was also the junior and senior student manager for the forecast group at Lowe under Professor Keil. And after graduation, I currently live in the Bay Area. So I'm currently working as a software engineer and also getting my Master's of Science in CS at Stanford. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to moderate this session. Just a little bit of housekeeping items. So questions are welcome to come in at any time during the discussion, and there's two ways to send in the questions. So you could either place them directly into the chat and we'll read them out for you at the end of the presentation, or you can send them privately to either me or Rebecca. Okay, so I'm really excited to introduce your speaker for today, Professor Manfred Keil. So Professor Keil has an MSc in mathematical economics and econometrics and his PhD from the London School of Economics. Before joining CMC in 1995, he taught economics at institutions in Houston, Montreal, and Boston, focusing on macroeconomics and econometrics. He served as a chairman of the economics department at CMC in 2009. Currently, he is the Associate Director of the Lowe Institute for Political Economy, where he oversees a team of up to 20 research assistants working on economic forecasting. Outside of CMC, he also has a wide range of community outreach, where he co-hosted joint forecasting conferences with UCLA's Anderson School since 2010, and more recently with the Inland Empire Economic Partnership, where he is the chief economist. He also represents Riverside and San Bernardino counties with the Southern California Association of Governments. And most recently, on February 18th, he delivered a State of the Region address at the Ontario Convention Centre, speaking to an audience of about 560 ticketed attendees. Today, he'll talk to us about the nation, state, and regional economic outlook, specifically focusing on the impacts of Trump-era policies on tariff, deportation, and regulation. Please join me in welcoming Professor Keil.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Alina hasn't even told you sort of half of what is relevant about her. So she was one of the few Harvey Mudd students who we hired at the Lowe Institute. And you have to realize, let me sort of make this into a bigger scenario. So if you work at a college, typically as an undergraduate, you don't get to work in research institutes. So CMC is special in the sense that we have 11 research institutes, and we hire undergraduate students to do research, right? So you typically don't get to do that until you are in graduate school. At the Lowe Institute, we have a forecast group, and we work together with UCLA's Anderson forecast. And we are in charge to deliver the forecasts for the Inland Empire. So many of you either were at CMC or have children who are at CMC. So let me tell you, Claremont is the last city in Los Angeles County. At its border is a northwest and a north-south street called Claremont Boulevard. And if you cross that, you're in San Bernardino County. And San Bernardino County and Riverside County together are called the Inland Empire, which is a metropolitan statistical area. There are 380 of those in the United States. And when I moved to Claremont in 1995, I sort of said, well, how many people are living there? Maybe 400,000, 500,000. It's 2.7 million people. And that's important because it will explain a lot about the traffic that you have out here and so forth and so forth. At any rate, back to Alina. So we hire for the forecast group not only CMC students, but Pomona students and Harvey Mudd students, because we need to do a lot of coding. And Alina was a CS major when she decided to go into a double major, and she's brilliant. So she has, when she graduated after 3.5 years from Harvey Mudd, not 4, she had a 3.98 GPA. So to put this into relation, there have only been 12 students at Harvey Mudd who had a 4.0. And so she missed it because of 1B plus in her freshman year, and everything else was A's. So with Alina, I had a problem when she graduated. She said, "Shall I go to graduate school?" And she got accepted into MIT, into Harvard, into Stanford, and so forth and so forth. But when she told me what her salary, starting salary was, and I won't give you that, I sort of didn't know what to advise her. So in the end, she's decided to start working full time and to get a CS degree at Stanford. So that's Alina. Okay, the topic for today. We just had the State of the Region conference in Ontario at the convention center, and you always look for a theme for these conferences, right? And accordingly, you find a title. And initially, when we were planning for that conference, we thought, okay, so we are now in March. Well, then we were in February. So February 2025, let's think back. What happened 5 years ago, and what was the development over the last 5 years? And 5 years ago, we were in the coronavirus recession, right? So it started in February of 2020. And we could say what has happened to the US economy, what has happened to California and the Inland Empire, or Southern California in general, right? Um, and then when we brought this up with our membership at a meeting, there were two fairly high-powered executives who said, no, we don't care about this. We want to hear about what effect the Trump policies will have on the United States, on California, and on the Inland Empire. And we said, yeah, with hindsight, I should have thought about that. So that's what we should do. And then once you settle on that, then you want to come up with an attractive title. And the attractive title that we chose was "The Answer, My Friend, is Blowing in the Wind." Can I actually hold on? Let me see if I can see what you are seeing in terms of. I'm working on two computers, so give me one moment here. So the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind is, of course, a 1962 song from Bob Dylan. And at the fear of losing a lot of the audience who wouldn't know this, I thought we're lucky that there's a film now, so maybe more people will know that song. And that song is about uncertainty, right? So the theme of this talk is uncertainty and the consequences of it. And so you at some point when you make presentations, you have to worry about, are you still connecting with the audience? I'm sure that there are many people who are joining in my program who have realized that if they talk to younger people and they make certain jokes, it doesn't fly anymore, right? So at some point, I was sort of suggesting titles for a talk that were "What Goes Up Must Go Down," which many of you know as a song by Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And it's called Spinning Wheel. And I thought it has to do with recessions, except for what goes up as a boom must come down. And I looked in the eyes of my research officer, and by the way, that was not Alina Hu. And I said, surely you know Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And she gave me this complete blank stare. And I said, that's okay, because you're not my audience, your parents are. So in front of you, there is this phone. Why don't you text your mother and ask her if she knows blood, sweat, and tears? And so she texts her mother, and the answer comes back, honey, I'm sorry, I don't know blood, sweat, and tears, but maybe you can ask your grandmother. That was painful. I wanted to say, can you take the knife out of my back? With Alina, I had a similar experience when we went to Coachella Valley. So we also write economic reports for the Coachella Valley Economic Partnership. And we visited the casinos. And the manager we had talked to was saying, oh, the casinos are doing well. We do a lot of entertainment. Just last night, we had Billy Idol here, right? And many of you who are my age will know songs like White Wedding and so forth and so forth. And we drive away, and I said to Alina, I said, are you impressed? And she said, no, he doesn't even know how to pronounce the artist. I said, what do you mean, Billy Idol? And she said, no, it's called Billie Eilish. And I thought, oh my God. Okay. So this is where sort of a disconnect comes between the audience sometimes, but we have a good mix today, and so I hope that I can still reach you today. Okay, so the theme of the talk today is about uncertainty, and if you wish, is there going to be a recession in 2026? Right? Okay, next slide, please. So let me quickly go. Oh, by the way, if you have questions, please ask them right away. It's best rather than to wait until the end. I will try to address them if I have enough time. So, what is the current situation in the U.S. economy? So before last year, we had big uncertainty because we didn't know what the election was going to be. We now are past the election. We know that Trump won and that the Republicans control the House and the Senate. So that uncertainty is gone. And the economy, as you can see, was doing fairly well. If you look back all the way to 1896, GDP grows at a rate of 3%. That's the magic number. And most recently, if you look at it in 2023 and so forth, the economy has been growing at 3%. In the fourth quarter, it went down a bit, but 2.2 is still a reasonable number, right? And so here the gray lines are recessions, and this is the growth rate of GDP. It's the most general measure of economic well-being for the economy, right? Next slide, please. Now let's go the other way. Yeah. So if you want to know what GDP is going to be this quarter, there's a variety of ways to do that. You can go to certain forecasters, JP Morgan, any of the investment banks, and they have something called a blue chip consensus. And it's the consensus of the basically most famous forecasters, commercial forecasters. And they will make predictions about the first quarter of GDP. And that sits at 2.1% and has been fairly steady. But there's an interesting one, which is at the Atlanta Fed. And so here's what the Atlanta Fed does. GDP is only delivered once every quarter, and even then with a delay. So we won't know until the end of April what GDP growth is in the first quarter, right? But here's what the Atlanta Fed does. They take numbers as they become available and look in the past and say, okay, in the past when we had GDP numbers, as these numbers became available, what would happen if we tried to use those numbers to predict what the end of the quarter GDP would be? And there, just now, the Atlanta Fed's estimate went from basically 2.1, first of all, to minus 2.5. Let me try to let that sink in. Minus 2.5% growth in the current quarter, not for 2026. And well, it went first of all to minus 1.5. Then 2 days ago, it went to minus 2.8. And it's now sitting at minus 2.4. So again, this is not some forecast institute. This is the Atlanta Fed trying to forecast GDP from numbers that are becoming currently available. If we are at minus 2.8, that's a serious recession, right?
Dr.
Anything that's,
Keil,
yes.
you is that because of the tariffs, the fear about tariffs?
No, because they don't know how to feed in the fear of tariffs, right? What it is that there are certain variables that really turned down in January, such as consumption expenditure. And if consumption expenditure goes down, 70% of GDP is explained by that. So personal consumption expenditures went down and exports also went down, right? So at the moment, between the two of them, that's what caused that big decline. And I frankly, I've never seen declines like this in the federal Atlanta Fed estimate, right? So this is very serious. So keep this in mind. Next slide. What else do we know? If we try to forecast, so you can sort of compare what we do as forecasters with volcanologists is a good analogy. What do volcanologists do? They try to predict volcano outbreaks. So think of a volcano outbreak as a recession. And what do? They put certain sensors around the volcano. And the good thing about sensors is they're not causal, meaning they don't cause the outbreak. They simply try to tell you what the probability is of the outbreak. And we have the same thing in economics. So there are certain theories that will predict whether or not there's a recession. So here, most famously, is the yield curve. So the yield curve is the difference between a long-term interest rate, 10-year Treasury bills, notes, versus a 3 month Treasury bill. And on a different slide, I have that data all the way back to 1955. And if you look at it, before every recession, the yield curve inverts, meaning short-term interest rates become higher than long-term interest rates. We shouldn't pay too much attention to 2020 because even though that happened in March 2019, no one in their right mind will say that economists could predict the coronavirus outbreak, right? So the point there was that most economists on Wall Street, including ourselves here, were predicting a recession. And then coronavirus came anyways, so we don't know if there ever would be a recession. The disturbing part about this is that in 2022, this really went negative, and there was no recession in 2023. So 80% of Wall Street economists predicted that there would be a recession in 2023, and there never was one. It became known as the Godot recession, as in the play Waiting for Godot, where there's a little messenger who comes at the end of each act, and he will say, Mr. Godot cannot come today, he will come tomorrow, right? And so it's the same thing here. However, having said that, next slide. That measure just last week, turned once again negative. And this time it didn't turn negative because the short-term interest rates were raised by the Fed. It turned negative because long-term interest rates came down. And long-term interest rates coming down would suggest that the financial markets do not think that there will be a big booming economy, right? So that's another measure. Next slide, please. I could show you other sensors, and those would be yearly changes in housing starts. And again, they have been down. I could show you consumer confidence, which is another measure. And consumer confidence has not seen a decline of the magnitude that we saw in January since the last 5 years. So it was a huge decline in consumer confidence. And that's important because if consumer confidence goes down, called, by the way, consumer sentiment. So if you search for the data, it's the University of Michigan consumer sentiment data. So that has gone down dramatically, suggesting that consumers are nervous about the economy, right? Consumer sentiment, what they do is they ask them over the next 6 months, are you planning to buy a new iPhone, a new refrigerator, this sort of thing, right? Okay, So enough of GDP. What about inflation? So inflation, you have basically the Federal Reserve has a target of inflation of 2%. And if they reach that target, then they will go into a neutral stance. So until they get there, they will not lower interest rates, right? And so the problem was that during the Biden administration, as you can see, inflation rates, for whatever reason, reached 9%. Well, I can tell you what, for whatever reason. The Biden administration spent $3.1 trillion to get us out of the coronavirus, right? So despite of the fact that many of you work in finance, I don't think you really know what $1 billion is, right? So here's what $1 billion is. $1 billion is, let's say you put down $1 every second, $1. How long do you think will it take you to reach $1 billion? And don't be a smart ass like some of my students. They will say, oh, a billion seconds, Professor Keil. So it's 31 years. That's what $1 billion is. Obama spent $778 billion to get us out of the housing crisis, the Great Recession. We cannot comprehend numbers like that. Let me try. On the day when Jesus Christ was born, if every day after that you spent $1 million, you don't get to $778 billion. We must have been in one hellhole of a recession. Well, Biden spent 3.1 trillion. Okay, so no attempt of even trying. So what do we get? We get a 9% inflation. The Federal Reserve steps on the brake. They try to lower the inflation rate to below 2%, which is the yellow dotted line, and they're getting there. But the most recent data shows you from starting, let's say, in October, that or September, we're moving away from the 2%. We're going to 3%. And why is this of importance? Well, the Federal Reserve originally planned to lower interest rates this year 4 times, each time by 0.25 percentage points or 25 basis points. In the most recent meeting, they have said that they are not going to reduce it 4 times. They will consider reducing it 2 times. And their first meeting is in March. And when they were asked why, they used the same word as I used for the title, which is uncertainty. They said, we don't know what is going to happen, so we want to wait before we say anything until our March-April meeting, right? Our forecast now is that either they will only lower it once or not at all this year. We just had the UCLA's Anderson forecast, and UCLA's Anderson forecast is now that the Fed will not lower the interest rate at all this year, right? Whatever implication that has for housing starts and whatever you want, you figure that out yourself. Next slide. Unemployment rate actually does not look that bad, right? If you look at historical levels, we are at quite low levels, and it has hardly moved. We're around 4.1%, 4%. My prediction is, so in January it was 4.0%. The unemployment figures will be published tomorrow. They're always published on the first Friday of every month. But here's the trick to remember. When they published the unemployment rate of February, the data was collected in the week surrounding the 12th of February. So if you think about when the first layoffs came from the Trump administration, that's hardly anything. The unemployment rate this time is not going to go up above 4.2, right? So the big increases in the unemployment rate will first be visible in April, if there will be any. Okay, so until then we're sort of safe. So this Friday, I would be surprised if it is above 4.2. Next slide, please. So here's what people are worried about. Here's the uncertainty about the Trump administration, right? And again, I'm not trying to do a judgment whether or not these policies are good or bad. It is just the uncertainty that was created. So, for example, tariffs. So the first thing that was announced was that tariffs would go up for Mexico and Canada by 25%, for China by 10%. Then Trump announces that the stock market falls by 700, the Dow Jones, and he goes back into the public and says, no, we're not going to do this until in a month's time. So he took back the 25% tariff increase for Mexico and for Canada, saying if you do a better job controlling the border in terms of fentanyl and so forth, then we will think about it. Okay, so comes a month later, which was last week, and he says, no, you didn't do a good enough job. We're going to raise it by 25%. What does the Dow Jones do? Well, goes down by 900. Next day, goes down by 600. So what did Trump do yesterday? He said, we're going to wait with this increase for automobiles until the 2nd of April. By the way, if you listen to his speech, why not on the 1st of April? And he said, I don't want to do it on the 1st of April because you think it's April Fool's. So we're going to do it on the 2nd of April. I'm not joking. That is what he said. Okay. So on the 2nd of April, he will decide whether or not to put that tariff on it. Now, let me tell you this. It's not just like putting a tariff of 25% on Germany. With Mexico and Canada, you have supply chain problems. There are parts of the automobile industry that travel back and forth 8 times. 8 times. So the forecast by Anderson Group of the cost of a pickup truck, it will go up by $8,000. And the cost for an SUV, the average SUV price will go up by $9,000. So we're talking a serious increase in prices. But again, we don't know. It's uncertainty. And if you are hit with uncertainty, think about your own life. What are you going to do? You're going to postpone action, right? You're not going to invest. You're not going to buy a house. If there's uncertainty, sort of everything comes to a standstill, right? So that's at the moment the problem with the tariffs. What about deportation of illegal immigrants? Well, few people know that in the residential housing industry, the percent of illegal aliens working in it is, according to a study by Kalu University, 28% in California. So if you lose those workers, A, you cannot build, or B, you will have to hire local workers, and that will drive up the cost, both of the house and your time in terms of when you can start this. What else? Taxation. Well, we now have the sort of first blueprint of a budget, and the idea is to again give tax rebates. But if you give tax rebates, then you will have huge budget deficits, right? Unless you can cut back government expenditures by the same amount, and it's not clear that you can cut it back by the amount necessary in terms of what you have in terms of decreases in taxes, right? And the US government deficit in terms of GDP at the moment is 6.7%. In Europe, they're trying to stay below 3%. 6.7% is unheard of as a budget deficit, right? What else is there? Deregulation. Well, hopefully deregulation will make it easier to build things and speed up. But then again, there's uncertainty, and that's it. I think it's time for people to start using the word stagflation, which is a word that we knew in the 1970s. Stagflation was stagnation and inflation at the same time, right? And here's a reason, by the way, that I want to talk about the Inland Empire a little bit, and you will say, I'm not interested in the Inland Empire. Why should I know about this? The Inland Empire has the attribute of showing signs of first in, last out in a recession. So it is as if you think of the equivalent of a lake freezing. A lake freezes from the periphery. And the Inland Empire is the periphery to Southern California, right? And so the first signs of a recession will be felt here for a reason that I will explain to you in a minute. And it's the last one that sees a recovery. So watch out for employment statistics from the Inland Empire, because if the economy is going down the drain, it will be first seen here. Okay, next slide, please. This is what I was saying about the Anderson forecast. $9,000 increase for the SUV and the pickup truck 8,000. The editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, certainly not a liberal outfit, is very clear about what they think about the tariffs. Yeah. Next slide, please. So despite all of this negative talk, the forecast of UCLA's Anderson Group, and we certainly stand behind that, is not for a recession in 2026 or for a recession in 2025. So basically, the Anderson forecast is based on the idea that in 2005, inertia will just carry the US economy forward. Think of the US economy as a supertanker. And the supertanker is going in a certain direction. And now somebody is turning the rudder. Let's say the captain, in this case, Trump. Even if you turn the rudder, it's going to take quite a while for the supertanker to turn. And everything in terms of the US economy that we see is still good enough that it will carry us through this year. Inflation will go up and the unemployment rate will go up. And growth will come down in 2026. But what counters all these negative stories is actually artificial intelligence. So we think that the effect of artificial intelligence will be an employment boost similar to what you saw in the 1990s when computers were introduced, right? Next slide, please. So what about California? Oh, a beautiful state, right? Well, so thank you, Nevada, because if it wasn't for Nevada, we would have the highest unemployment rate among all US states, right? Let me try to let that sink in. California has the highest unemployment rate across all US states, except for one, Nevada, right? We are 1.4%, 1.4 percentage points above the US average unemployment rate. So California, if you thought the US is sick, California is definitely sick, right? Next slide, please. So I've looked at what happens before when you had US unemployment rates and California unemployment rates. And look at the 80s, they're basically the same, right? So then I looked at periods, when did they diverge? Okay, and they diverged by more than 1.4 percentage points during certain periods, such as the end of the Cold War in the 1990s. So California, the peace dividend for California was negative, and that was because of its aerospace industry, right? So California suffered from the cutback in military expenditures. Then around 2000, it didn't open quite as big. That's why I didn't mark it. There was the dot-com recession. So that affected Northern California, Silicon Valley, more than anything. And then came the Great Recession, the housing bust. And there again, once again, we're more than 1.4%. So what I'm trying to say is, it is not unusual for California to have a higher unemployment rate than the US, more than 1.4%. But it typically goes back to where it was before. At the moment, it doesn't seem like it's going back to the US unemployment rate. As a matter of fact, it looks like it is more diverging, right? Next slide, please. So what do we have in California at the moment that is different and that we should look out for? Well, we had the fires, right? And if you think that I went around Pacific Palisades and took some pictures, you're wrong. This is Lahaina. So in January, I went to Maui, and Lahaina had fires in September of 2023. This is what it looks like. And I've taken the best looking ones in Lahaina, where 102 people died, by the way, not 55 or 60. 102 people died, many trying to run into the water. In Lahaina, 3 houses have been rebuilt. 3 houses, and that's a year and a half later, right? Typically, what you see is if you're lucky, you will see some wooden planks at the properties. The right picture actually is more advanced than almost anything else that I saw around there. So if you think we're going to get some stimulus in construction from the fires, yeah, maybe, but not for the next 5 years, right? It is amazing how long it takes to rebuild these things, right? Next slide, please. So what has happened since the end of the coronavirus recession? So this looks a little bit complicated. Focus on each one of the areas, just the red bar. So the red bar is the increase in the unemployment rate since February 2020, right? And there you can see it went up by a little bit in Los Angeles County, went up a little bit in Ventura, went up a little bit in the Inland Empire, even in Orange County, and certainly in California, and in the US even. But here it comes. It would take me 3 lines of mathematics to show you that the change in the unemployment rate, meaning the red bar, can be simply found by subtracting the growth in the labor force, by subtracting the growth in the employment rate from the growth in the labor force. Let me see if you understand that. So imagine that the labor force doesn't grow at all and employment increases. Well, then not surprisingly, the unemployment rate will come down, right? Let's go the other extreme. Employment does not increase, but the labor force shrinks. Then the unemployment rate will also go down. So, one more time. The change in the unemployment rate, the red bar, is basically the blue bar minus the yellow bar, right? So what that means is in Los Angeles County, the unemployment rate went up by a little bit. Why? It's because employment fell by actually a large amount, almost 5%. The only reason why it doesn't show up in the unemployment rate is because also the labor force shrinks. So people are leaving Los Angeles County. What about California? Same story here. The unemployment rate went up a little bit more because employment did not shrink as much, but the labor force also shrinks. So again, you have people leaving California. For the first time in our 170-year history, we have lost a congressional seat. Right? I hope that sinks in. Forget about the firms leaving. People are leaving California. New York also lost a congressional seat. Texas gained 2, Florida gained 1. Okay. What about the Inland Empire, which is the area that I focus on? Yeah, the unemployment rate did go up, but notice that it went up because the labor force went up by more than employment. So it's actually fairly healthy. What you want to see is both the labor force growing and employment growing. And in all of Southern California, not a single area has the labor force growing and employment growing except for the Inland Empire. All the other ones, including California as a whole, and Orange County, by the way, and Ventura County, all of them, the labor force is shrinking, and so is employment. People are leaving. Okay, next slide, please. If you think that that is bad enough, here are the numbers December 2023 to December 2024. So over the entire year, for California, 113% of the growth in employment was generated by 3 sectors. The 3 sectors are health, they are logistics, and they are government. And when it's government, it's local government, and local government is education. Okay? That's the same thing similar for Los Angeles County and Orange County. The Inland Empire is an extreme. In the Inland Empire last year, employment grew by 160% for those three sectors. But all other sectors in the Inland Empire, all other sectors, manufacturing, construction, they all shrank, with the exception of one. Retail sales grew by 100 people. Well, if you think about the Trump policies, which sectors are going to be affected? So tariffs is going to affect what? Logistics, right? Remember that 40% of all US imports, 40% comes through two ports. Those are the ports of Los Angeles and the port of Long Beach, right? So if you hit that with tariffs, you will definitely have fewer people working that. And in the Inland Empire, 20% of all people now work in logistics, right? What about health? Well, we know what is going to happen with the health cut. We know that the state of California is looking at CalMedi in terms of cutbacks. So they're going to be big cutbacks in health insurance. And public education, I don't have to tell you that if you look at kindergarten to 12th grade, the number of students is bound to fall, and that has nothing to do with Trump policies. It simply has to do with demographics. Right? Next slide, please. So whatever that slide showed, whatever good news there is, namely that three sectors at the moment are driving everything in California and in the Inland Empire, those three sectors are bound to lose because of the Trump policies, right? So I've written down the numbers, and the slideshow will be made available to you. You can download that. As you can see, the job growth comes in low-wage sectors. The high-wage sectors are shrinking. Okay, next slide. That's a picture from The Economist in terms of Trump's policies on tariffs. So what that says, it's going to impact on imports. And that's the impact on Southern California and the logistics industry. Next slide, please. So let me tell you, to your surprise, when I said the Inland Empire is first in, last out, why that is. And it basically comes from four facts. And when you were a student at CMC, or if you have a student at CMC, I don't think you know how extreme these facts are. So let me try. There are 383 metropolitan statistical areas in the United States. They're either one county or two counties. The biggest one obviously being New York, the second biggest one being Los Angeles. The Inland Empire, called Riverside, San Bernardino, Ontario, is the 12th largest MSA in the United States. We just passed San Francisco. Let me try to sink that in. The Inland Empire just passed San Francisco to become the 12th largest MSA. Who's in number 11? Boston, Cambridge. They're 200,000 people ahead and shrinking. So the Inland Empire is about to become the 11th largest MSA. So that's, if you try to understand the area around Claremont, that's the first fact that you have to understand. There are a huge number of people who live east from here, right? Next. There's a huge amount of commuting. 17% of the labor force in the Inland Empire commutes to coastal areas. That's 370,000 people every day. The entire Coachella Valley, where either you went to the Coachella Valley Festival or your students will, or your children will, has 400,000 people. 370,000 people on the road means, let's imagine the entire Coachella Valley, Palm Springs and everything, empties and goes on the road. That's why you're stuck in traffic on the 10, on the 210, on the 60, and on the 91, okay? The distance between Upland and downtown LA is 37 miles. Okay, that's a fact. You can look that up. You can also look up the commuting times in Google. And the slowest commuting time from Upland, where I live, to downtown LA is, well, let's figure this out. It's 37 miles. If you drove 60 miles an hour, you would be there in 37 minutes, correct? And so indeed, if you drive at midnight, that's how long it takes, okay? On a Thursday morning, if you go from Upland into downtown LA, the commute is 2 hours 10 at 7 o'clock. The slowest return is on a Thursday at 5 o'clock, 2 hours 20. So if you do that every day, your commute is 4.5 hours. And that is why you sit in traffic like you do, right? So 4 times a year, I have to go to UCLA's Anderson School, and the talk starts at 9:30. If we don't leave Claremont at 6:30, we don't make it there in time. And that includes taking students who I tell, like Alina, this is really going to be interesting for you to see the Anderson forecast when I really need her next to me, because I need to be able to go in the HOV lane, right? But that's besides. Okay, so that's a second big fact. It's a big commuting, and everyone hates commuting, right? Next slide, please. These are the daily commutes from Riverside County into the coastal areas, right? 17% of the labor force commutes, okay? More so from, obviously, from San Bernardino County into Los Angeles County, and more from Riverside County into Orange County. To some extent, they also go into San Diego County if you live in that corridor on the I-15, right? Next slide, please. Here's a third fact about the Inland Empire. Why do people live here and work in downtown? So they do it because housing is cheaper, right? So the people who cannot afford any more housing in the coastal areas, they move out here. Next slide, please. Okay, go back one slide, actually. So the 3 facts I've given you so far tell you why the Inland Empire actually is first in, last out. Let's say there are 3 types of people. People A live in the Inland Empire and work here. Type B are commuters. They live in the Inland Empire and they commute. They work downtown. And type C lives in the coastal areas and works in the coastal areas. Okay. So why do these people commute? Let's face it. Let's establish a simple assumption that everyone hates to commute. We all agree, particularly if you sit for 4.5 hours in traffic. So why do you do it? You do it because your human capital is higher than what the firms here have to offer in the Inland Empire. So you commute because your human capital is higher, therefore you commute into where the better paying jobs are. And the better paying jobs are in the coastal area, okay? The sea people don't have to commute because they even have higher human capital, and they just live and work there, right? Because they can still afford it. Okay, so now let's see what happens if in the center of economic activity, Los Angeles County and Orange County, what if a recession starts to happen there? Who are the first people to get laid off? The people with lesser human capital. That would be the B people. So the B people get laid off first, but we measure unemployment by residency, not where you lose your job. So I live in Upland, I work in Claremont. If I lose my job, the unemployment rate in Los Angeles County stays the same. In San Bernardino County, it will go up. So if the commuters start to lose their job, the numbers will show up in the Inland Empire, okay? That's why it is first in and last out. When you come out of a recession, the reverse happens. Okay, final slide. Next slide. Why is it that firms do not come out here? That would solve all the problems, right? If firms, high-paying firms, came out here, then the people who commute wouldn't have to commute. They could find jobs here, right? And the answer is that in Riverside County and in San Bernardino County, currently, roughly 24% of the people who live here have a bachelor's degree or more. Now you will say 24%, that's not that bad. Let's look at all Canadian, all Californian MSAs. So next slide. That's where the Inland Empire is. We're next to Fresno. Stockton Lodi, not surprisingly, because Stockton Lodi is the Inland Empire up north, right? So we are in a situation where in the United States, 37% of residents have a bachelor's degree or more. In the Inland Empire, it's 22%. And then you shouldn't be surprised that the firms do not come out here. There's simply the amount of human capital that is out here is not sufficient, right? So does that get reflected in the numbers? Yep. I told you that the Inland Empire is the 12th largest MSA in the United States. If you look at a measure of wealth, then what you do is you divide GDP, what is produced in the area, by the number of people. That's what Adam Smith called the wealth of a nation. It's per capita income, okay? Just by comparison, by the way, if you look at US states, California has the 4th highest per capita GDP. We should do a quiz on this. Guess which one has the highest per capita GDP in the United States out of all states? And the answer is New York. Why is it? Because finance produces a lot of GDP. Not sure if you will guess number 2 and 3. Think about it for a moment. We don't have a way to tabulate it, right? No, Utah, definitely not. And let me tell you, it's not God's gift to the United States, Florida. Florida is number 27. Texas, 19. So who's 2 and 3? No. Texas is number 19. Massachusetts is correct. Massachusetts is number 2. And if you guessed Massachusetts, no, not Chicago. If you guessed Massachusetts, what would be your next guess? Massachusetts is tech. What's the other tech state? Connecticut is clever, but Connecticut has the highest per capita income, which means by residency. But it's because the people who work in New York, they live in Connecticut. Yeah, Washington is correct, right? It's because they've got Microsoft and so forth, right? So if we do this by MSAs, then the Inland Empire falls from number 12 to, guess what? 290. We are on the same level as Waco, Texas. And I know Waco because when I came to this wonderful country as a Fulbright scholar, they put me into the University of Texas. And if you're at the University of Texas, they will drag you along to some football game in Waco, as we called it, against Baylor, right? So I've been to Waco and I jumped into the Brazos River and to this day regret it. But having done that, what's in Waco, Texas? Dr. Pepper is produced there, right? So if we want to solve the problems in Southern California, which have to do with traffic, we have to find a way to attract firms to move into the Inland Empire, into that area. And the firms will not come unless they have a higher human capital, right? Next slide. That's just a cute way to show what my students are doing in terms of research. They compare the Inland Empire to Silicon Valley, right? So where Alina is, and the size of the bubble is the contribution to GDP. So if you look at the Inland Empire, logistics is the 3rd largest employer, right? But there is not a lot of contribution there to GDP. The bubble is not that big. There are only 40,000 people who work in financial services, and the bubble is bigger than the logistics bubble, right? What about Silicon Valley? Well, professional and business services, and what else? What are bubbles are big? Information, yeah? That's what Alina does. So logistics is there as well, but it's a very small bubble. They employ very few people. Okay. So that's what I was going to make the presentation on. And it was twofold. I wanted to tell you, A, what to expect for the US economy, and if you wish, for California over the next 2 years. And the answer is things look bleak at the moment. Sectors that have generated employment last year, they're going to be hit hard by Trump policies, but it's not going to be severe enough to cause a recession. there's too much forward movement. And even in 2026, the continued downturn of the economy will be countered by artificial intelligence. The second purpose of the talk was to give you a bigger picture of when you went to school at CMC, what the area is like, right? And the area is Claremont borders on the Inland Empire. And so a lot of the stuff that you experience, such as slow traffic, things like that, they have to do with what happens in that area. Okay, good. So on that note, that's it. I'm ready for questions, and shoot away.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Prof. Kyle. We do have some questions in the chat. I know we're almost at time, so for any of you who have a hard stop at 5, thank you so much for joining. Otherwise, we'll try to go through the questions in the chat very briefly if you have some more time, Prof. Kyle.
I have time until 8 o'clock when I'm giving an exam today.
Poor
So
students. Okay.
so the longer you ask, the more my students will be thankful. They would say, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, I have to, pave the way forward, I guess. Okay, so we have a question on, are you concerned about being able to get good GDP measurements in the future, given the talk coming out of Washington about changing how GDP is measured?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's again, this uncertainty, right? When they say, given how GDP is measured and so forth, we really don't know the changes that they're going to do, right? Once we see the changes, we can deal with it, just like with the tariffs. But these things on again, off again, that's the problem here in terms of what to. The big takeaway from this talk is remember the word uncertainty. And with uncertainty, we just don't know what to expect, right? And we're now in the Trump administration. We are really in the fourth month, and despite his talk to Congress, we really don't know, given his back and forth on tariffs and so forth, what he will do.
Sounds good. Thank you. And then another question on kind of just with the whole like new policies and how you see that will impact the state. So one question is on, do you see reductions in government employment extending to state and local government, maybe more into the red states? And someone else is also asking if you could speak briefly to issues in Northern California.
So okay, so one at a time. There will be cutbacks in government expenditures, that's clear. But what I was trying to say is government expenditures in terms of employment has three categories: federal, state, and local. All the major movement comes in local government expenditures. And local government expenditures is driven by public education. And there you simply have, if you talk to people in schools at the moment, they're all cutting back, and it doesn't even have anything to do with Trump's policies. It simply has to do with demographics. The number of students K to 12 is shrinking in California, right? And so that will have a big impact on local government expenditures, right? Northern California and Southern California are, it's interesting because we have a state that has 40 million people in it, right? It's bigger than Canada. It's as big as Spain. It's as big as Argentina in terms of population. They all have 40 million people, right? And people talk about California as a whole. Here is California, right? When you really should talk about regional economies. And the regional economy up north, where Alina sits, is very different from the regional economy down here, right? So whatever I said in terms of sectors being particularly impacted, such as logistics, that's not the problem in up north. Up north, the problem is at the moment, there does not seem to be a large increase in people working in tech. If nothing else, it seems to be stagnant. right? So the question is for Northern California, what will be the effect of artificial intelligence? And my feeling is that whoever I've talked to in the tech industry, they think that artificial intelligence is going to be a big driver over the next 2 years. So I think that the cluster that's sitting up there, which is centered around information, is going to boom again. It's just a question of when it happens. Of course, one of the questions is, will you all have to go back to work, right? Alina, how many days do you have to show up?
3 days.
Yeah, there you go, right? So that means also that people currently can afford to perhaps live away from the Bay Area, right? And just come in for the 3 days, right? But the question is, will firms be able to pull that off? But I mean, the outlook for Northern California is given, despite the firms that have left, it is still a cluster, like no other cluster in terms of information, right? If you look at investment capital, that's up there. The amount of tech capital that flows into Northern California is bigger than the next 10 states combined. And that includes Texas, right? So it's simply a cluster that from the simple fact of the amount of talent that is up there in information is not going to go away.
Awesome. And we have some more questions kind of generally just on policy, how the policy will impact domestic economics. We have some question on how would the tariff impact American manufacturing? Would that cause an uptick in American manufacturing? How would that impact farming or agriculture? And how would the foreign policy impact domestic economic issues? Or how would deportation impact the economy?
So the big effect of tariffs is to raise prices of the imported goods. But in terms of automobiles, it would really disturb the supply chain setup, right? And that's because car parts go 8 times back and forth between Canada and the US before they're being put into the right. And each time you're being hit by a tariff, and that is why Trump has given them another month to adjust to it. I mean, the fact is you cannot continue in the current setup with automobile manufacturing if the tariffs go through, right? So that's very clear. In terms of agriculture, so there the question is the other way around. Will the other countries retaliate in terms of tariffs, right? And there's just a big article today in the LA Times about nuts, right? So the percent of world production in certain nuts is just 70% walnuts. If you hit them with a 10% tariff, then obviously foreigners are going to buy fewer of them. So it will have an impact on agriculture. And then you have the problem in agriculture with deportation, right? So deportation affects 2 sectors. The 2 sectors are agriculture, and the other sector is residential construction. Let me stress that it's not construction in general. It is residential construction, right? So in general construction, the percent of illegal aliens is not that high, but it will delay residential construction. It will have an impact there, right? Here's one thing that Trump is counting on. Again, I do not know what to say. Have you heard about the gold card? So there's something called the gold card, right? So people get a green card if you apply to work here to be a permanent resident, right? Trump says he's going to issue a gold card if you are a foreigner and you bring in $5 million. And he claims that 5,000 people so far have applied. Well, multiply 5,000 with 5 million, and he will say, you know, we will have that money to pay down the government deficit. Again, there's uncertainty. I don't know what to say. If he's right, then 5,000 times 5 million, that's a lot of money, right? But is that what he's going to get for the gold card? I don't know. It's uncertainty, and it's the same uncertainty that the Federal Reserve is not making any forecasts at the moment, right? So bottom line, which sectors will be affected the most? Logistics, manufacturing, and agriculture, and residential construction, right? They will be negatively impacted. Again,
Okay.
in terms of what is driving California at the moment, those are the sectors that are currently driving California, right? And they're going to be the hardest hit. Same thing with the Inland Empire.
Okay, so I think it is 5:08, so I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. So maybe I'll just compact a bunch of questions into one. I think there's another kind of line of question that I'm seeing is related to the recession. Kind of just like, do you see if so, for example, if the AI boom is not as high as expected, do you see that that will push us into a recession? And kind of like, would the inertia of kind of the economy be able to push us past the recession because of just simple like inertia?
So that definitely the assumption here with the Anderson forecast was that it is artificial intelligence that will pick up, right? And I'm sure Alina can confirm that in terms of what she's learning at Stanford at the moment. The Stanford CS program is really into AI, isn't it, Alina?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is really what they do at the frontier at the moment. So if that doesn't materialize, and there are people like Daron Acemoglu at MIT who will actually claim that that will cost jobs. But if you don't follow that, most of us assume that artificial intelligence will work in a positive way. And if that doesn't materialize, then things look bleak at the moment. I'm sorry, if what you take away out of this meeting that we had for an hour, if you take away from this that he doesn't know what's happening in the future, yeah, that's the point. It's uncertainty. That's the title that I was trying to give. It is what is hitting not only me and forecasters, it's what's hitting the Fed. We don't know what is going to happen, and that uncertainty in itself is not good. It will make you postpone things that otherwise you would do, right?
Thank you so much, Professor Kyle, and thank you so much to everyone for joining. Just a reminder that the next session is examining the impact of the 2024 election with Charles Kessler and Yanis Avragenis on Thursday, March 13th. And the alumni weekend is coming up on June 5th to 8th, 2025.